So I have a little story. It's sort of a mini story in comparison to these wonderful other storytellers that we're hearing this evening. But when I heard that the theme was a sophomore outing or second chances, the only thing that really came to my mind were two words: Nancy Drew. Allow me to explain this little tale of thievery, lust, obsession, and disappointment. As all red-blooded fifth grade boys are, I was completely obsessed with Nancy Drew books. And I recall very, very vividly titles such as Password to Larkspur Lane, The Sign of the Twisted Candles, The Clue in the Diary. And then I know there were 56 of those little books done in the original yellow-bound, Grosset and Dunlap editions. I had all of them. Well, mostly all of them. But I got them in a very sort of unpleasant, unsavory way. There was a girl in my class who was a bit nerdy and always looking for some friends. And so she had clued into my complete obsession with Nancy Drew, told me that her older sister had the entire collection and that she would sell them to me one a week for $1.50 each. I was like, dude, this is totally great. But when you're 11 years old and you live on a farm and the only money you make is during the summer when you mow the lawn, and that's $2 a week, by the time March rolls around, that shit is spent. You have no money. So what I then did was what another terrible thing that red-blooded American boys do. I stole from my mother, actually. And I would take $3 out at a time, and I figured I would be good for a solid week. And so I would bring it in every week, and I ended up amassing all these Nancy Drew books. And my mother, God love her, always never really asked questions when she was a little disturbed about something. So she allowed this entire collection to kind of grow in my bedroom. And so I hung on to those books until I turned about 18 or so, and then suddenly it just wasn't cool to like Nancy Drew books. And even the Hardy Boys were super dorky. I always thought they were completely dorky compared to Nancy Drew, to be honest with you, because they had like a whole army of friends who helped them in their mysteries. Nancy had Bess and George, and Bess was completely useless. George was like the Peppermint Patty of girls' mystery stories. She had the boys, and they did everything but call her a lesbian in the book. Everything. But anyway, I always really liked her, but then, when you turn 18, you get rid of them, right? So I decided I was going to sell them because I thought, I'm going to make some money off of this. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, dude, you stole this money from your mother, and now you're going to, reap a profit because you think somebody's going to buy these Nancy Drew books. But it didn't dissuade me from it. So I took them to the local bookstore, convinced, after I'd done some research, that I was going to walk away with, at least $300 for the complete set. What I didn't realize was that the girl's sister, who I borrowed them from, wrote a lot in them. She would cross out the books that she had, she would write her name in 16 times, and then, because I was completely, obsessed with Nancy Drew, I then would check off the books that I had. So by the time that these books were ready to be sold to the bookstore, they had looked they looked awful, they were in terrible shape. So I ended up walking away with $40. And I chalked it up to chance and forgot about Nancy Drew. And then about 10 years ago, suddenly, I was back into Nancy Drew again, in a way that I was not obsessed with in 25 years. I was like, okay, now I can afford it. I'm gonna go on eBay, I'm gonna get the whole fucking set. And so I went onto eBay and I saw there was a complete set of Nancy Drew books on there, and the starting bid was $250. I'm like, oh, nobody else is gonna bid on this, I'm gonna do it. And it turned into, this was 2 days before the whole sale went down, this turned into 48 hours of me obsessively checking eBay and jacking it up. And by the time I got it, I was spending $450 for this collection of books. So I got them in the mail. That didn't end it. I had to then get all the other editions from it, because most of these were rewritten in the 1950s because they were super racist back in the day when they were more than super racist. They were offensive, essentially. But I wanted the old offensive ones, I wanted the new ones, and I wanted the redone ones. And so in my house, just a couple blocks away, you will find this huge bookshelf with literally 150 Nancy Drew books. And when I went to Paris, I collected Nancy Drew books. She's called Alice there, Alice. And it's the only book I can read in French, actually. Mostly because I know the story. It's A Secret of Shadow Ranch. Or as the French call it, Alice Orange. Anyhow, so then after I had amassed all these books and I put a shelf in, and everybody would come over and like, just marvel at this whole wall of yellow Nancy Drew spines, I realized that like, I might as well read them again. So I started reading them again, and I was profoundly disappointed. Because it's never, it just did not hit me the same way that it did when I was an 11-year-old boy, for one thing. And I realized that I had done this like whole obsession thing, and then when I'm dead, somebody's gonna have to go through these books, and who wants them? I have no children, so I told my goddaughter last summer when she came to visit, and she said, "What's all these weird old books?" And she pulls out one, and she's like, "This is really, really dorky." And I'm like, "Well, you're gonna inherit them someday." And then proceeded to tell her how much they were gonna be worth, and she's like, "Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it."